How's your lockdown going then? Are you finding it hard to stop raiding the treats cupboard? Yeah, me too. Today, this is Zestology. I'm Tony Wrighton, stuck inside, obviously, aren't we all? And today we're looking at the integrity of one's diet during lockdown, the impact of too many sugary treats on your immune system. Oh dear. Preventative strategies to stay healthy. Could intermittent fasting help during lockdown? The joy of carbs. The quality of one's news sources and the people you follow who will give you good information. Some great recommendations as well. Today on the podcast, it is the man known as the Ketologist, Chris Irvin. But a bit of a spoiler, he may be the Ketologist, but he's not all about keto. Hope life is going well for you in these strange times, and I hope you're staying healthy as well. We recorded this podcast since the pandemic took hold, and the importance of diet really can't be underestimated, which is why I set up the interview with Chris. Nobody's saying that any diet can cure anything, but it seems most people acknowledge at the moment that keeping yourself as healthy as possible is a really good idea, especially as a lot of us aren't doing as much exercise. And that's where the Ketologist comes in. Here he is. The integrity of one's news sources are really important at the moment, aren't they? And that actually isn't just news sources, it's also social media. Because there's some people who are very positive, there are some people who are very negative, and there's people who have a little bit of balance in between. And it's finding those trusted sources that you like and really blocking out the rest. But the problem is you can't really if you're on Twitter or Facebook or anything like that.
Yeah, it's funny. You know, we're kind of in this time where everybody wants to be playing a role in this, which I think is great. I think that there's definitely a purpose that we can all serve during this time. But I think there's also some people that are overstepping, the boundaries a little bit and, either putting out stuff that's very negative or putting out stuff that's just a little bit beyond what their expertise is in. I think that there's some great people out there. Like one of the guys I've been following a lot right now is Mike Mutzel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. Yeah, so he has a big YouTube channel. I think it's High Intensity Health, and he's a researcher who he reads papers. And what a lot of people don't realize is during this time, a lot of research is being published every day in real time out of Wuhan, out of Italy, out of all these other places. And he's doing a really great job of reading this information and breaking it down and sharing it with people to let people know like what the science actually says. I think when you get on the media and stuff, you definitely fall victim to whatever somebody else's interpretation of something is. Somebody reads a blog post and then they share it on social media or they talk about it on the news or whatever. But I think finding somebody who's actually trained in reading research and is reading it and kind of giving his best take on it, I think is great. Paul Saladino is another guy who's doing a great job. He's an MD who's been doing the same thing, just, breaking down these research papers that are coming out and letting people know what the science says. And I find it to be really, well, one, obviously it's very informative, but I think it's enlightening to know what the research is saying about who's actually at risk and kind of putting some more context to that detail. I think that like a lot of, originally we were all talking about age, and that was the only thing that people were talking about. It's like if you're at over a certain age, you're at more risk, and if you're under, you're not. And I think once we actually started looking at the research, we found that there's a lot more going on than that. And it's actually these comorbidities that's playing such a big role. And, I think these comorbidities or these other disease factors that are playing a role, I think that those can be scary at times for people. But I think that they can be actually something that can give us a little bit of motivation to take care of our health, right? Like if we know that hypertension and, having, your cholesterol being off and, cardiovascular disease, prediabetes, all that stuff puts you at an increased risk. And, there's kind of signs that this maybe isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Maybe that's just a good reason for us to be focusing on what we can control, which is our diet. I think that's kind of what's been nice about some of these people shedding light on that research that's coming out.
And that's why I wanted to speak to you, because actually I've pretty much ripped up the schedule for Zestology over the last couple of months, and we've just started again because everyone's thinking about this stuff. Everyone in the world is affected by it, and most of us are stuck inside, and we are going to be for the foreseeable as well, aren't we? And there's two aspects to it. Firstly, none of us want ourselves or the people that we love to be badly affected, or in fact wider humanity and our countries and everything else. And secondly, we kind of start to think a little bit more about preventative, not medicine, but preventative strategies to make ourselves more healthy in the future. It is a real wake-up call, isn't it? And that's why I thought it'd be really interesting to talk to you about the diet side of it. It's a massive global health wake-up call, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Well, it's like you look at this and, when the disease first came out, a lot of people were talking about, they're looking at the numbers and they're like, oh, this is nothing compared to the number of people that are dying from cardiovascular disease or diabetes and all this stuff. And, that was kind of like the narrative for a while. But then you start looking at it and you realize that it's all kind of the same, right? Like if we don't take care of our health and we don't put our body in a position, if we're not fighting in the chronic diseases that we're all faced, and we're kind of being subdued to those, and we're also not going to be able to fight this infectious disease that's coming on. So I think that there's so many similarities between the two. And, it's a little bit disheartening that it takes such a massive thing like this pandemic that's sweeping over the globe to kind of wake people up to like, hey, we probably need to be taking care of our bodies a little bit better. But the hope is that there can be some good that comes out of this, that maybe people will respond, to the fact that, I'm sitting here. I'm definitely somebody who's worried about this and everything, but I feel more confident in the fact that I have spent the last 5 years of my life really taking care of my health. And that's made me be able to rest a little bit easier during this time. And I think that, maybe this can be a wake up call for a lot of other people that, if something like this ever comes back around, it'd be a lot easier to be starting, in a good spot rather than starting in a deficiency. But even if you are starting in a deficiency, I think the good news is it's not too late and there's something we can do to improve it.
Yeah. And I think, it's probably worth prefacing the rest of our conversation by saying we are not saying anything that follows here. We're not saying that, if you do a certain diet or you follow a certain lifestyle, whatever, you'll be all right, whatever comes along. That's just not the case. And actually there are, a few instances of people who seemingly are very healthy who are very badly affected by coronavirus. So that's not the case. But you can do as much as you possibly can do to kind of build your immunity. And then you can't do any more, really.
Yeah, and I think the truth is that we don't know that much about it yet. Like this isn't diabetes that we've have decades of research on. This isn't cardiovascular disease. This isn't some of these other things. Like it's a novel infectious disease that we don't have a lot of information about yet. So I think anybody that's making any wide claims about anything being able to definitively stop it, I think is coming from a wrong place. I just don't think that we know enough to say that. But I think that the research that what we have been able to see starts to shed light on some things that we can do that can help, like you mentioned, right? Like things that would seemingly, if we kind of have to jump to conclusions a little bit, but if we see that, people who have pre-diabetes and diabetes are at an increased risk of getting this condition, then we can assume that taking strategies to control your blood sugar could be positive, right? And certainly no negative side effects to doing something like that, right? So I think that what gets me most excited about the people who are posting about, supplements you can take and diets you can follow and, sleep hacks and stress management, all of that stuff is that, while we can't say for sure that any of these things definitely work, these are things that we can do that are within our control, which I think is the most important thing. When you're faced with this time of uncertainty, uncertainty coupled with isolation, that's just kind of a recipe for anxiety. Yeah. And, if we can just sit back and focus on, all right, what are the things that we can control? Obviously one of the big things we can control is our exposure to the condition, right? So it's trying to stay at home, trying to limit the social gatherings, keeping your distance, all of that stuff, social distancing and whatever. But also, what can you do to make sure that your body is best prepared to handle this? And, that, like you said, that doesn't mean that, when somebody says fasting is great for this, doesn't mean that fasting is going to prevent you from getting coronavirus, but it is going to make your body function more optimally. And, the goal is to get your body back towards a healthy baseline so that it can better combat this if you do get it, right? We want to make sure that if you get the condition, that you're in a better position to be able to fight it than you would be before you took any steps to improving your health. So I think that's just kind of this combination of it gives us things to focus on that, definitely will not be harmful. Somebody telling you to get better sleep or to focus on your mental health or, eat a lower sugar diet or something like that, there's definitely no negative side effects to this. So I think that it's something worth trying for a lot of people.
Definitely. And there is one other reason that I'm particularly pleased I'm speaking to you today in terms of diet, as we'll get on to. And that is, as it turns out, when you're stuck in the house all day, it's difficult to socially isolate yourself from the fridge. It's impossible. I've just been going to the fridge all day, every day.
I came across a paper yesterday that was published in the 70s, and it was a really cool paper that it was looking at the impact that different types of sugar had on our immune function. And one of the things that I found, one of the things that they presented in this article, and they tested all kinds of different sugar. It was like table sugar, fructose, honey, all these different things. And they found that your body's ability, your white blood cells, and I think it was specifically your neutrophils, had a decreased capacity to basically perform phagocytosis, right? So to break that down, just basically a lowered ability to actually fight off like infections in like a 6-hour time frame after eating sugar. Now, obviously, this is a paper from the 70s. This is several decades before coronavirus, so this isn't anything that we can say is causative or anything like that. But it kind of shows us that like if we want our immune system to be functioning really well, that going to the fridge and pulling out something with a lot of sugar in it all day, that's probably a battle that we don't want to be fighting. So I definitely hear you on this one. It's tough being stuck at home, not in your normal day-to-day operations, with just have snacks sitting around all day and you're kind of bored. It's very easy to just kind of go reaching for the sugary snacks and everything.
Yeah. It is. It really is, and I know that people listening to this will be like, "Yeah, I've been going to the fridge a little bit more than usual as well." I mean, I actually find it really easy to intermittent fast, but once the dam is broken, my goodness, it's then hard to kind of stop snacking. And I think it's quite interesting talking to you because obviously you are the Ketologist, and your business is keto as well. So that's obviously a very big thing for you. And I did quite a few podcasts on keto. We spoke to Dom D'Agostino and quite a few others over the last couple of years. And I had to tell you, Chris, I'm not keto anymore. I was for about a year and a half. And when I started adding a few more carbs in, I kind of got quite thin. And maybe that's the opposite problem to what a lot of people have, but that's probably just my body shape. I'm kind of long and thin. And when I added in more carbs, I actually felt like I kind of filled out a little bit more. And I don't really notice a decrease in energy, although I know now what's happening is I'm not eating quite as well.
Right.
So what do you think about keto and low carb? And, there'll be some people listening to this who know they should give it a go, but maybe are reluctant. There'll be others that's thinking keto is just not for me. So what do you think? I mean, I suppose you'd say there's no one size fits all.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm definitely a lot less, despite being known as like the ketologist and working for Perfect Keto and stuff, I'm not dogmatic in my nutrition beliefs.
Great.
I got into keto because I saw it as a really great diet for certain uses, right? And I think that, when it comes down to it, the way I look at nutrition is pretty simple. I think that you should consume the things that your body can put to good use, and it can use as energy, and it can use to build a healthy, resilient body. And some people can use carbohydrates very well for that. You seem to be a guy that falls into that category where you can use carbohydrates pretty well. It seems like you probably have a healthy metabolism that allows you to effectively break them down and use them as energy. But many people don't. I think in the U.S. here, at least, we have this epidemic of prediabetes and diabetes, where it's like 1 in 3 people are like pre-diabetic. And when you start looking at a lot of the chronic diseases that we have, like cardiovascular disease and cancer and some of these other things where, a lot of these conditions display an impaired ability to use carbohydrates. And in some cases, consuming carbohydrates can become more damaging for those people. So I think it really is as simple as breaking it down to, can your body handle carbohydrates? And if your body can't, which is going to be the people who are pre-diabetic, they're insulin resistant, right? I think that's the biggest predictor. If you're insulin resistant, you can't use carbs, then you shouldn't have them. You should, at the very least, follow a low carb diet. I think the best approach is to go full keto to allow you to kind of restore your metabolism and repair these things. You hear the word or the phrase restore your metabolism, and it sounds like it's like this, a hippie phrase or something like that, but it's true. I mean, we see in research that, when you cut out the problem, which for these people is carbohydrates, you can restore your ability to use them down the road, and then you may be able to kind of integrate them back into your lifestyle. But for everybody else,
and sorry, just to interrupt, what about if you're not necessarily pre-diabetic, but you're just kind of you're pretty healthy? What I think most people in this podcast listening category fall into is healthier than the average person, but partial to the odd treat, or sometimes more than the odd treat. And I'd probably put myself in that category as well.
Yeah, so you're saying more than like kind of the people who not really falling into a disease or a pre-disease state, but just kind of generally healthy people. Is that kind of
I think so. But I mean, in terms of looking at nutrition and drilling into science and data on nutrition and viruses, which is specifically what we're talking about, what you say, I mean, it's really interesting. You quoting that study that shows that if you eat sugar and different types of sugar, that will impair your body's ability to fight viruses. And so I suppose that's what people are interested in.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, and before to jump into the immune stuff, just in general, I think that when you're trying to figure out if keto is right for you, I think you have to think about what your primary goal is, right? I think that when it comes to like weight loss, I think that keto is probably one of the best diets out there, not just because it produces such great weight loss, but because some of the other benefits that come with it. Normally when you're losing weight, you're in a big calorie deficit and you're fatigued and you're hungry and all this stuff. But on keto, we kind of see the opposite. So I think it's great for that. I think it's great for people who are finding themselves to be more sluggish, fatigued, kind of poor mood, just body not really handling, carbs very well when they're eating them, things like that. I think those people really fall into that category where keto is optimal. But when you get outside of that, I think that like keto really just becomes this 4-letter word where people, they hear keto and they just associate it with, bacon and butter and like all this stuff. And really that's not what it's supposed to be. Keto is about this metabolic state of ketosis, right? It's this, you restrict your carbohydrates to a level that gets your body into a state where it's producing these ketone molecules that not only provide your brain it's a fantastic energy source for your brain, but it also can be a epigenetic modifier. These ketones can kind of help change your genes in positive ways. It can do all these great things. So when you kind of understand that ketosis has its benefits, then you realize that there's multiple ways to induce ketosis. There's multiple reasons to induce ketosis, and it's not something that you have to be in all the time. So I think that for the average healthy person out there, ketosis is this thing that we should be cycling in and out of our diet periodically. I think that during times like this where we're stuck at home with some uncertainty about food availability down the road, we are wanting to make sure that our body is functioning as optimally as possible. We kind of want to give it whatever extra resources we have to make sure that it's performing well, make sure our immune system is working well. I think that ketosis is a great thing for that. So I think it's a great thing to cycle in and out. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be on a under 20 grams of carbohydrate a day diet. Like you mentioned, you're doing intermittent fasting, and that is an incredible way to induce ketosis, especially for somebody who is metabolically healthy like yourself. Now, I will say for people out there who want to induce a state of ketosis during this time but are not metabolically healthy, just doing intermittent fasting right away might not be enough. You may need to really go full keto before the intermittent fasting will kind of get you to that point. But for somebody like yourself or somebody like me who's been following the diet for a long time, intermittent fasting is it's a very easy way for me to induce ketosis. So that's something I can do in the first half of my day to kind of reap the benefits of that, right? There's going to be a lot of health benefits that are going to come from ketones circulating in my bloodstream. So that's going to be something that I'm going to do. I'm going to be intermittent fasting in the morning and kind of spacing out my meals more and stuff like that. So I think that the one size all, like you said, there's no one size all fits approach to nutrition. And this is especially true during this time. And, while keto, I think keto has become this thing where we have a name for it, and it's this very specific diet that the harm in that is that a lot of people, when they hear that word keto, they already have a preconceived notion about it. It's either good or bad, when really neither is true. It's more about what's most optimal for what you're trying to do right now.
Yeah. And I mean, all that's quite interesting then, because obviously you mentioned at the moment there is a bit of uncertainty about how much fresh food we can actually eat. So, by the way, I know you're normally based in Austin, but you're in Florida at the moment. Are you kind of on lockdown at the moment? Are you just not going out, and is that what's going on in Florida?
Yeah, so we do not have a shelter in place yet, but I've been pretty much locked down for like the last week, just
Yeah.
not really finding a need to go out. If somebody in the family needs something, like needs something picked up or needs to go out for something, I'm kind of putting that on myself to do a lot of those things just because I'm younger and pretty healthy, so would rather me do it than somebody else. But really trying to just knock it out and be responsible during this time. So I'm definitely, it's kind of a self-induced shelter in place.
Good man. Yeah, and this, I think this is going out in the next week and a half or so, but things are changing so quickly that it might well change by the time people have listened to this anyway. And therefore, I mean, it's been a little bit slow off the ground, the response in this country, but we now are locked down except for going out for groceries and one bit of exercise a day.
Okay.
And all that means that it is quite an uncertain time in terms of the food that you can source. What's your? You mentioned that you're not particularly dogmatic about diet. What have you eaten today, and what would be an average day? And today is as good a day as any to know what you would eat.
Yeah. So I actually am doing intermittent fasting right now. So for right now, it's about 12:30 Eastern time here in the afternoon. So I have not ate yet, just had some coffee. And that's intermittent fasting is something that I did for a long time. I recently stopped it about 8 months ago because I found that I wasn't eating enough from it.
Okay.
During this time, I brought it back in because I figured, hey, it's a great way to, one, eat less during this time, right? Like, if you eat less, that means less food that you're going through. And, it's kind of more survival now than it was before. So I'm really kind of just doing like one meal a day right now.
Right.
Yeah. And that's basically just with that main goal of just trying to eat less, right? So still doing like I'll do a little bit of snacking throughout the day. Which usually involves just like some macadamia nuts, perfect keto bars. I definitely have a little bit of a stash of those put away for during this time for snacks. But then for the meals that I'm eating, I'm really just trying to focus on like nutrient dense foods. I think that red meat is the most nutrient dense food that somebody can eat. I think it's like the most bang for your buck. So a couple weeks ago, before this started getting really bad, I went to a lot of the local butcher shop, or to the local butcher shop in Austin, and I stocked up on some steaks and some ground beef and then some organ meat as well, because I think organ meat is the most bang for your buck you can get in terms of nutrient density and things like that. So that's what I'm focusing on eating, and then I'll put aside with that too. So usually like a leafy green veggie or sweet potato, something like that. But I think right now, and this isn't, to be honest, this isn't too different from my normal diet. I think, the fasting is the only thing that's maybe a little bit different. Normally I'm doing breakfast in the morning where I'm having like eggs and like a collagen or whey protein shake. And then I usually don't eat lunch, kind of skip that and then go to dinner. So I'm really eating the same way that I was before, skipping the breakfast and just trying to focus on those foods that are going to give me the most nutrients.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty good. And, one meal a day is quite a long intermittent fast. It's got to be said.
Yeah.
Do you have pudding though? Come on, you must have the odd pudding.
What's that?
Oh, I think we call dessert pudding over here.
Oh, okay.
Do you have the odd dessert? Please tell me you do.
I do. Well, I normally do. So right now, I don't. There's not really a whole lot of like sweets on hand right now, but the perfect keto bars have kind of been my go-to like sweets. I really like. If you're asking for my outside of this time, like when I'm just kind of in my normal dietary routine, definitely. Yeah. Like they're few and far between. I'm not like a nightly sweets guy, but I do like to indulge sometimes. And when I say I'm not dogmatic, that means that like I'm okay with breaking keto and things like that. So yeah, I definitely like to, especially like going out to dinner and stuff, love to get a dessert and stuff. But during this time, there's like this big focus for me of just trying to keep those blood sugar levels in check. So if I am doing any sort of like sweet tooth stuff, it's those reaching for those keto bars, which I know will kind of keep the blood sugar in check.
Yeah, and yeah, I probably need to be a bit better at puddings, to be quite honest. We have like this ice cream over here, which is like flavored with stevia, so it's kind of lower sugar, and it's just so good. It's so hard to resist.
No, and I think those are great options too. Like my take on that, and that's whether it's during this time or during any time, is that like, and I use those things too. Like here we have Enlightened is the ice cream that like I'll go for sometimes. It's
Oh
like
wow,
a
yeah.
low sugar ice cream, and my take with those things is that it is always better than the alternative, right? Like it's always going to be better to have rather than like a loaded sugar ice cream. I think it's going to be superior to have like a stevia sweetened ice cream or treat or something like that. And same thing as during this time. Like if you are somebody that you have a big sweet tooth and you're stuck inside, at least put the right options in front of you, right? Like if it's a lower carb, lower sugar dessert option, I think that that's going to be a heck of a lot better than going for the full sugar option right now. So I think, in the essence of, I always say meeting people where they're at, whether that's you're starting keto for the first time and there's no pandemic going on, or you're just, trying to eat a little bit better during this time. I think that like going for those lower sugar alternatives is going to be great.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Just interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you that it is brought to you by my podcast partners, and that is Bioptimizers. If you suffer from digestive issues like gas or bloating or cramping, even when you think you're eating healthy stuff and then you just kind of feel bloated afterwards, that was me for 20 years, and I'm really happy that I'm starting to sort that out. But you think you're eating healthy, nutritious foods, but it's not quite going down the way that it should do. You could benefit from a high-quality enzyme, and you can check out Bioptimizer's high-quality enzyme, which is called Masszymes. And their focus is on you optimizing your biology, which is why they're called Bioptimizers. Masszymes is a full-spectrum enzyme formula. It's got more protease than any other commercially available formula, 5 different kinds, and it also contains all the other key enzymes that you need for optimal digestion. It's one of the strongest enzyme formulas in the industry. And if you fancy finding out more, you can head to bioptimizers.com/zestology. Remember though to use the code zestology10 when you get there. So that's Zestology10. And if you're in the UK, by the way, you need to use the UK site, which is bioptimizers.co.uk, but you can still use that code as well. They're all about optimizing your digestion and making sure that even when you do eat that food that you think is healthy, you don't get that bloating afterwards, because it's not fair, is it? I mean, if you're eating a load of kind of gassy lentils, then I can't help you. But if you're eating something that's kind of genuinely really healthy and quite paleo or a little bit bulletproof, kind of low carb, I mean the kind of thing we're talking about in this podcast and loads of podcasts that you'll listen to on Zestology, it's then a bit gutting if you don't feel great afterwards. And that's where Bioptimizers can help. So it's bioptimizers.com/Zestology or bioptimizers.co.uk and use the code Zestology10. Back to the podcast. And then in terms of immunity, you mentioned the studies that you've been looking at. You've obviously been kind of going quite deep into that at the moment. Mm-hmm. What are you with all your I know you've got a kind of academic and scientific background as well as being the Ketologist on Instagram. Presumably a low carb diet and intermittent fasting, you've already mentioned them, but what else are you looking at in terms of immunity, your own personal immunity and that of your clients at the moment? Is there anything in the way of supplements that you're looking to? I know there's a big controversy online at the moment as to whether vitamin D and vitamin A is helpful or unhelpful in terms of coronavirus. And to be quite honest, even if you've got a master's in nutrition, you probably struggle to follow it. I certainly am.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. I mean, the supplementation thing, like you said, there's a lot of this going back and forth about, is this supplement good for you, or is it helping you, or is it not helping you, or is it making it worse? And I think in most cases, I think that it's either the first two, where it's either not going to do much or it's going to be helping you. I don't think that, things like vitamin D and vitamin A, I think that taking them, I don't think is going to be detrimental. My take on it is it depends on what your situation is. So when I was in Texas for the first part of this, it was pretty gloomy out. I wasn't getting outside much. I was definitely taking vitamin D not because necessarily that I think it's going to be this magic immune booster, but because I know that when you have vitamin D deficiencies, your body just doesn't operate efficiently. So that's something that I was using during that time. I sent vitamin D back for my family who's back in the Midwest because, it snowed there a couple days ago. They're not getting outside. right now I'm in Florida where I can get outside. I have a backyard here. I can get outside, be in the sun for a couple hours a day. I don't really feel the need to supplement with the vitamin D as much. So I think that should you be taking an excessive amount of a lot of these stuff during this time? I don't think we have a clear answer on that, but I think that we should be using them to prevent any sort of deficiencies. So that's kind of how I feel about the B vitamins, vitamin D. I've been taking lysine too, which is something that I've always done to boost immune system. I kind of it's always been a supplement that I keep on hand when I'm traveling and stuff to keep my immune system going. So I've been taking that as well. But that's really it in terms of supplementation. Electrolytes too, just trying to kind of keep up on those things, making sure that I have plenty of magnesium and stuff like that. But I'm really operating my supplement protocol through the lens of making sure that I don't have any glaring deficiencies in any area, right? Not necessarily trying to oversupply my body with any of these things. In general, I think that the human body does a pretty great job of accomplishing what it needs to accomplish as long as we don't put it in a deficit, right? So I think that as long as we keep our bodies operating well. So, if you're in an area where you're not getting sunshine, then it's probably worth it for you to, take some vitamin D. If you're not getting any sort of vitamin C in your diet and you're not in ketosis, because, there's thought that ketones can kind of provide similar benefits as vitamin C. If you have neither of those things going on, then yeah, it probably makes sense for you to get some vitamin C in your diet, right? So that's really it with supplements for me. And then outside of supplements and nutrition, the focus has been on the mental side of things. And, today, right before I hopped on this podcast, I saw that on, I don't know what news station was on, but they were finally addressing this for the first time that, a lot of us are sitting at home and we're struggling mentally through this time, mentally and emotionally. Like I mentioned earlier, you have this anxiety that's being produced from uncertainty coupled with this isolation. And we really do have to manage that. I was reading a research paper it was published, I think, in 2015 that showed that how loneliness had this ability to modify the genetics of our immune system. So the study that I found saw that people who had a lonely who had a lonely lifestyle or who felt lonely, they actually had alteration in their genes that impacted the way their white blood cells behaved and made them immunocompromised. And I was thinking about that a little bit more and how, loneliness is kind of subjective, right? I could be, I could be somebody who is at home by myself with nobody around and feel completely fulfilled socially, while other people can be in a crowd of people and feel extremely lonely. So what that kind of said to me was that, if loneliness has the ability to alter our immune system, then we should probably be focusing on not feeling lonely. And I think that's where these mental health tactics come in, trying to, use social media to stay connected with people, use FaceTimes and other technologies to stay connected with people, taking time to just take stock of your mental state, journaling and meditating and doing things like that. I think that that's something that's being swept under the rug because we so often assume that we have to put something in our body, right? We have to take a supplement or a drug or eat foods to make sure that we're healthy. But sometimes it's about these other things that's just as important. So that's a big thing that I've been focusing on is just trying not to feel, isolated, trying not to feel lonely, trying to feel fulfilled socially during this time, and also trying to promote that as much as I can for people because, it's really funny. I think that many people right now, while they're stuck at home, probably aren't living lifestyles that are too drastically different from what they were doing before. But it's kind of like a diet where, if you were never tracking your macronutrients before, you never paid attention to it. But the moment you said you could only have, 100 grams of carbs or something like that, all of a sudden you're craving carbs, right? And I think that's happening a lot to people right now, where some people who even may have enjoyed being isolated a little bit more, now that they're told that they have to stay home, it's putting this pressure and this emotional stress on them. And we know that this isn't great for health in general, but especially our immune system. So I would say that, outside of diet, that's the thing that I've been putting the most effort into is just trying to really focus on my mental state.
Yeah, there are some really kind of uplifting things that have come out of it. I mean, obviously it's a hideous situation and none of us would want to be in it. But there are some very uplifting stories that are coming out of it. And certainly in this country, last night, the health secretary basically went on TV and said, look, we want 250,000 people to volunteer and help the health service and be NHS volunteers. And within a few hours, 170,000 people had volunteered. And as this goes out now, I'm sure all those spots will have been filled. And I went on the site and I thought, and one of the things was exactly what you were talking about, is loneliness. And one of the things you can do is make regular phone calls to check on people who are isolating at home, who might feel even more isolated than normal. I thought, that's in my skill set, talking. I'll do that.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to think you can do something to help people and make a little connection. And you hope that when this is all over, those connections will endure. And I really hope they do.
Yeah. And, I think that you bring up a good point. And I was talking because I've been doing the same thing as you, just trying to, call people and stay in touch, and especially those people who are at home. And you get out, I go out for walks, and I'm seeing such great things, like little kids that are writing these like messages on the sidewalk in chalk for people about like having hope and, and all this like really great stuff. And you see, families that are getting outside and spending more quality time together. And you see big companies coming together to try to create, more ventilators and masks and things like that. And you see all this good stuff. Like you said, it actually is really great stuff. And obviously what's going on here is a tragedy. And by the time this is all said and done, there's going to be a lot of lives lost. But, I was reading I'm reading the book David and Goliath from Malcolm Gladwell, and I highly recommend people reading that if they never have. But he talks about, and in one of his chapters, this really interesting thing about it was about how like Germany was bombing London back in the day, and how they were doing it repeatedly because they thought it would ruin the morale of the people, and they thought that it would cause panic, and everybody would it would just tear down the economy and all this stuff. And then they come to find out that really it made the people more resilient. And he kind of talks about how there's these, he talks about there's this book that breaks this down, but they talk about how with the bombings, there were your direct hits, your near misses, and your remote misses. And, your direct hits are the people who, they actually get affected and they pass away. And then they have your near misses of people who maybe, in the case of coronavirus, it would be somebody who gets infected but survives, or somebody who has family members around them that they get infected and possibly die. They're kind of close to it, so it's a traumatic experience. But then you have these remote misses, which are all of us out there who haven't been affected, and maybe by the end of this don't get affected in any serious way. And those people, like what's happening back in the day with those bombings, is that they came out more resilient than ever. They faced fear, and they came out stronger, right? And I think we're starting to see that now, where people are starting to feel a little bit more confident. Companies are coming together. People are trying to be there for one another. I think that like in this time of adversity, when it first started happening, there was a lot of panic. And I definitely think there's still some panic out there, but I think the panic is starting to turn into resilience a little bit. And that's something that gives me a lot of hope during this time, that, it is possible for us to come out the other end of this better than we were before, even though it doesn't look like that now. But I do think that there's a possibility that we could, get stronger as a society, and there could be some really great things that I hope carry over. I hope that calling people on the phone, and I hope that like getting outside and going for walks and trying to have a better diet and all of that stuff, I hope that stuff carries into the post-corona era.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well, look, we're almost done, but before we go, I ask everybody about one book that they would recommend and one tip for living with more energy. You just mentioned Malcolm Gladwell there. Is that, it can be a book you're reading at the moment, or it can be any book. But what is one book and one tip that you would come up with?
I think so. The best book that I would recommend right now is, and it's probably my favorite book, is Code to the Extraordinary Mind by Vishen Lakhiani. I read this book. I've read it actually probably 4 or 5 times now. But I read it first about 4 years ago, and it really changed my life in terms of like my outlook on things, and not letting how to not let certain stressors take over in your life, and how to kind of control your emotions and your thoughts a little bit better. So I think that in general, it's a very transformative book, but especially during this time when I think people could probably use hearing that message. So I highly recommend checking that out right now. And then what was the second question?
It was a tip for living with more energy and vitality.
Yeah, so I think that the tip for living with more energy is, in my opinion, is keeping blood sugar in check. So that doesn't mean keto. That doesn't mean necessarily having to go on a low carb diet. It just means trying to prevent the big rises and the continuous rise and fall of blood sugar levels. That's when you talk to people who are struggling with energy levels, that's typically what we see, is that they're frequently, getting these big spikes in blood sugars that lead to these big falls in blood sugar. And that kind of leads to an energy level that's just not even throughout the day. So I think that taking steps to control your blood sugar levels, like doing fasting and probably sticking to, lower glycemic foods, I think is a great way for people to increase their energy levels.
Good man. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find out more about you and everything you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm on social media as the Ketologist everywhere. So that's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Instagram's kind of my main platform. I also have a YouTube channel that's Chris Irvin MS. And then also the Keto Answers book that Dr. Gustin and I put out it's been like 6 months now, I think. That can be found on Amazon. So those would be the spots.
So we are almost at the end of today's podcast. Another lockdown podcast. It's like Groundhog Day, isn't it? Remember to check out the Ketologist on all social media, and remember to check out the probiotics brought to you by Bioptimizers called P3OM, using a patented natural process to upgrade a well-researched probiotic strain. These are my podcast partners, and the result is P3OM is a bit of a super strain of probiotics, sometimes described as the Navy SEAL of probiotics, and potentially eliminating pathogens and waste from your body as well. Maintainable in the human digestive system. And if you want a video to explain a lot better than me how P3OM probiotics work, then you can head to bioptimizers.com/zestology10 and watch them dissolve a piece of raw steak. I know I've spoken about this video already, but it's probably the best way to explain it, and it's better than I can explain it. The reason that this strain is different and good is that it is proteolytic. Probably haven't pronounced that right, but it helps you digest protein. So, I've organised a great deal for Zestology listeners. There's a 365-day money-back guarantee as well. If you are interested in P3OM, go to bioptimizers.com/zestology and use the code Zestology10. And if you go to bioptimizers.co.uk, you can use that code as well. And it's all about the gut for me at the moment. In fact, always, pretty much. But, when it comes to health, there's kind of 3 different things that we tend to talk about on this podcast: diet, lifestyle, and supplements. And I think the supplements that Bioptimizers come up with are really good. So Zestology10 is the code if you want to use that. Thank you to them for partnering with me on today's podcast. And thank you for listening. Have a great week. Eat good food if you can. I know it's not always possible, but the lower carb does tend to be good, doesn't it? And certainly a bit of a sobering wake up with the sugary treats information that Chris was giving us there. And one more thing, remember the book club. We are almost ready to kind of convene for the first time. And if you want to check out TonyWrighton.com or join the Zestology Book Club on Facebook, you just search for Zestology Books or Zestology Book Club, you'll find it. And then, we'll get together and talk about the first book, which is great. There's a little podcast as well, 10-minute little tiddler of a podcast about books as well. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.